Now, we have a wonderful speaker. I first heard her, 15 years ago?
Okay.
Yeah, about 15 years ago when she was a civil rights attorney and doing stuff on voting rights and things of that nature. So I met her before all this important stuff that strings out behind her name. When you say, who is Zero Shit Justice, Anita Earls, it's a big long list, tremendously competent person. And so now this morning I want you to listen real carefully. She has a bad throat this morning, and I want you to listen real carefully. She will maybe be whispering into this mic, but whatever. Listen carefully because we're talking about the rule of law and what it means to live in a just society. And it's people like Anita that see to it that legally and importantly the way the state runs, the way they try to keep us on track. So, Justice Earls, come up, please.
Thank you. Might take this out, actually. Can I do this? Yeah, I just would like to do this. Well, good morning. I am so thrilled to be here. I am Anita Earls, and so honored to serve you on the North Carolina Supreme Court. I want to thank all of you for being here this morning, for all the work that you've done. I recognize some familiar faces, some folks who helped me when I first ran in 2018. But for the new folks who may not know my background, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. And let me explain. I do apologize for my voice. In the past week, I've spoke at 10 events in 7 different counties. This is number 8. I got 2 more today. It is a big state, and I'm just losing my voice, but that's really a metaphor for why I need all of you, because you can be my voice, and we need to speak for the people in this state whose voices are not currently being heard. Yeah. So a little bit about me. For 30 years before running for office, I was a civil rights attorney in North Carolina. I had a statewide practice. And the most important thing I want you to remember about that and be able to tell other people about that is that it was my job to represent people and communities whose rights were being violated, and to try to use the court system to uphold their rights and freedoms. And the second most important thing I want you to know, if you remember nothing else, my career as a civil rights attorney, but on the bench, my agenda, there's gonna be a lot of negative ads about me and how I'm a woke radical and all the rest. The truth is that my sole agenda is upholding the state and federal constitutional rights that we all enjoy. That's right. And so I'm going to get a little more specific about what that means, but that's what I'm about. And just a quick word about my why. Why did I decide to become an attorney? I grew up in a family where I was the first one to be able to graduate from a 4-year institution, the first one to be able to go to law school. And the reason I wanted to be a lawyer was because when my parents met in Missouri in the late 1950s, a black man and a white woman, it was illegal for them to be married. So they moved out to Washington State. I was born and raised in Seattle. But that experience and many others really gave me a sense of how important the law can be, that used correctly, living up to that promise of equal justice under the law can open up doors of opportunity for education, for housing, for employment, for all of those basic things that we need in our lives. And so that's why I wanted to be a civil rights attorney, and why in 2018, after seeing what happened in the election of 2016, you might remember that one, it was clear to me that in the near future, our federal courts were not likely to be a place where we could find protection of our rights. But if you look at the state constitution, it is a very rich source of protection of our rights. There are some things in the state constitution that are not even in the federal constitution. Perhaps most fundamentally in this state, the right to a sound basic education in a uniform system of public education. Yes. So it seemed important to me to have someone on our state Supreme Court with a civil rights background. And that's why I ran in 2018. And this is what you got to remember. In 2018, it was a blue moon election, so there was no U.S. Senate seat on the ticket. The statewide seats were all the state appellate judges, and all Democrats won. We not only did we turn the state blue in 2018, but we also had higher turnout than the prior midterm and the subsequent midterm. And so what that says to me is that it is possible to help people understand why our courts matter and to help them understand the values that Democrats have. When I ran, it was the first time in a long time that our state Supreme Court race became partisan. That was the Republican General Assembly that made those rules. We now have to play by the rules that they made. And I think that we are again at a moment where people across the state are coming together in rooms like this, understanding that we face a crisis in our democracy, not only at the federal level, but also at the state level. So let me say a word about what our court does. In addition, I'm going to talk about some of the high-profile political cases, but we also do, people think of us just as criminal justice. And yes, that is a really important part of our function. Ensuring public safety and enforcing the criminal laws is part of the reason why I'm on the court. But that right now, today, that's less than half of our cases. So that means more than half of our work is on the civil side. And on the civil side, we decide things like, we decide cases that impact how much you pay for electricity, whether or not you'll be fairly compensated if you're injured on the job. If you're uninsured and you go to the emergency room and you're charged more than insured patients, can you sue the hospital over that? Those are the kinds of issues that we also do a lot of environmental cases as well. What powers will the state have to enforce environmental laws and make sure that our water and air stays clean? So a lot of really important things are decided by our court, and I think people don't realize that. And there are really important differences between what my Republican colleagues on the court believe about our state and our state constitution and what Justice Riggs and I believe. So let me talk a bit about how our court has changed. Because in 2022, I've served now under 3 different Chief Justices. At one point, earlier on in my tenure, the court was 6 Democrats and 1 Republican. And then with 2 election cycles, that completely flipped. So in 2022, the court was 4 Democrats, 3 Republicans. And that court ruled that extreme partisan gerrymandering of our legislative and congressional districts violates your rights under the state constitution. And we ordered that the congressional and legislative districts be redrawn. And North Carolina sent 7 Democrats and 7 Republicans to Congress, right? And then we had an election. And the court flipped to 5 Republican, 2 Democrats. And the new court did something that's really unheard of in the 200-year history of our court. They said, we're going to rehear that case. So the same case, the same facts, and so they reopened the case, and they didn't say that the districts are not gerrymandered. They didn't contest the facts. And understand that label, that notion that they are extreme partisan gerrymanders came after a 2-week trial with expert testimony and using neutral measures of whether the districts were fair. And in the Democratic court's ruling that the districts must be fair, we again applied those neutral measures. So we said, it doesn't matter who does it. Democrats, Republicans, nobody should be rigging our election system, right? But the new court said, well, actually, we as a court have no power to constrain the legislature. But it's not our business. And so that's what I mean by a fundamentally different understanding of the state constitution, because I believe that it is the court's function to hold the legislature accountable to the guarantees in the state constitution. And so when the legislature redrew in 2024, we sent 10 Republicans and 4 Democrats to Congress. And as you know, they have now redrawn again the congressional districts with the hopes of getting an 11-3 delegation. If we had kept that 7-7 delegation, Congress would be in control of Democrats. So that is the impact that the North Carolina Supreme Court elections have had on our country. And so when I go, when I talk to folks outside of North Carolina, they are watching what's happening here because they understand how important it is that we have fair districts in this state. And the good news is that the Democratic Party has a plan. And I'm going to tell you about that in a minute, but I also want to talk about education for just a second and understand that the 2022 court ruled, again, an order of the court, that if the legislature will not adequately fund our public school system to give every child that opportunity for a sound basic education, it's the court's function to enforce that constitutional right. And we ordered that over $600 million be spent over a period of years in very targeted ways with educational consultants studying across the state what interventions will improve educational opportunities for all our students. Then the election happened. The new court put a halt to that order. They stopped it. We had arguments a year later on an issue that in a dissent I argued we already had decided. And yesterday we issued opinions again, but no opinion in the Leandro case, no opinion in the school funding case. So that means we are now essentially 3 years out with no ruling, no understanding of why that money is being held up or why that 2022 ruling is not going into effect. So when I travel around the state, people tell me everywhere that the need that they have for better funding for public schools and just a little bit more, if they could just get a little bit more help from the state, they could do a lot with those resources. So I understand the importance of public education for our economy, for our communities, for our democracy. And I've written dissents explaining why I think it is wrong that the court has held up those funds. And as I'm standing in front of this sign about Justice Riggs, I have to remind us that I serve with 4 Republicans who ordered that the ballots of military and overseas voters be thrown out. It was only because a federal court stepped in the Griffin v. Riggs litigation, a Trump-appointed federal judge said that order of the North Carolina Supreme Court violated the federal Constitution, due process, and equal protection rights. And basically he said, you can't change the rules of the election after the election to get a different result. The problem we face is that federal judge also said you can change the rules of the election before the next election. So those rules that Jefferson Griffin was trying to enforce are now in effect for 2026, which means that military and overseas voters have to upload an ID. The Board of Elections is creating the software. In 2024, they couldn't even have provided an ID if they had wanted to, right? Not only were they told they didn't need to, but they couldn't have. The Board of Elections is fixing the software. Military and overseas voters can upload an ID. But more significantly, the voters who don't have the last 4 of their social or their driver's license number in their voter registration database, those votes won't count in 2026. Now, interestingly, parties went to federal court and said this violates federal law, and a consent decree has been put into place. So if people who don't have, again, last 4 of their social or their driver's license in their voter registration database go and vote in 2026, their ballot will count for U.S. Senate, but it will not count for my race. It will not count for any of the down ballot state races. So the North Carolina Democratic Party is working hard to make sure that we contact all those voters. This list of impacted voters is not the same as the Griffin list. So if you are not on the Griffin list, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have the necessary data in your voter registration in order to vote. So I urge everyone to go to the State Board of Elections website. It's maybe kind of hard to find, but look for, they call it the registration repair. Registration repair. Check the registration repair site. Check your name. Check your family members' names. It'll tell you if your name is there. You can't just look up your registration and it'll say you're registered. That won't tell you whether you actually have the last 4 of your social or your driver's license. You have to look at this list. If your name's on that list, then you have to contact the Board of Elections, your local Board of Elections, your county Board of Elections, to get that information to them. Can't do it over the phone, but there's multiple ways you can get them that information. And as a voting rights attorney, it's really important to me that everyone who is qualified has the opportunity to get a ballot, cast that ballot, and have it counted equally. And I just want to say a word about my colleague, Justice Riggs, because people may not realize that Jefferson Griffin only challenged ballots in the heavily Democratic counties. And people asked Justice Riggs, well, why didn't you challenge the ballots in the Republican counties? And she said, quite right, that as a voting rights attorney, she would never try to toss out the ballot of a legitimate voter, whether or not they voted for her. And I think that crystallizes the difference in values between Democrats and Republicans in North Carolina on the issue of voting rights. So I'm really excited to be here with you today. I want to make sure everyone meets my community engagement director, Elliot Milner. Elliot is a lawyer who has agreed to take time off from litigating to help me get around the state. If there's a community group or an organization that that we can reach out to, that my campaign can reach out to, I am not going to be able to have the kind of field campaign that I think is going to be necessary. The U.S. Senate race will have that campaign. The Democratic Party is organizing. I'm trying to do sort of an organize the organizers model. And so we're putting together groups of teachers, law enforcement and first responders, veterans, ministers, students, getting those groups to come together and get the word out about why our courts matter. Because so many people across the state actually don't know about the Griffin-Riggs election contest. They don't know about the problems with voter registration. They don't know about our courts. They don't realize there's a state Supreme Court that is making decisions that impact their lives. And so it's so important that you all realize the power that you have as influencers. You are all influencers in one way or another. You have networks, you have friends, you have family, you have email lists, maybe Facebook groups. There are ways in which you can connect with people who don't know my name and tell them about me, urge them to remember how important it is to vote all the way down the ticket. And of course, you can get involved in my campaign. My website is earlsforjustice.com. I need all the financial support I can possibly get. I love those $25 donations. I'll send you a postcard thanking you. So any amount that you can contribute to my campaign all comes together and helps me do the outreach that I need to do, and will help me get on TV and do all those things that we have to do in order to win statewide.